What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe as you tune into the channel and check out the content. And with that being said, man, I want to speak on this. This basically is a rant, right? And it's because of like the quality of play in the NBA, right? And everybody knows that the quality of play in the NBA has gone down. It's not what it like what fans want to see, and it's not what like older fans, it's not what they're used to. And so, and I think part of the problem is, excuse me, part of the problem is European basketball players don't really know the history of the league, right? And I think that's disrespectful for European players to not know the history of the league. And it's not all their fault. I think it's like the league, Adam Silver, and before him, David Stern, like they didn't require European players to know and understand the history of the league. Anytime like when people travel abroad, they always say it's good to learn like the laws and the customs, right, of whatever country that you traveling to, because you could offend somebody in another country without really meaning to. And so not only could you offend them, but you could break laws without even like one what we're used to doing here in the United States or in America, right? Used to doing certain things, but maybe when you go to other countries, like you can't do that in other countries. And so when you get over there in other countries and you do something that you think is harmless, but people take offense to it because their customs are different. Just like just recently learned that like in Dubai and some Muslim nations, like it's against the law for women to raise their voices, right? Like you can actually, like a woman can actually go to jail for raising her voice to a man in public. But you do that here, that's every day here. Women can do that every day here in the United States. It don't really matter. So now, the reason I think it's important for these European basketball players to understand the history of basketball is they don't know, they think that they're really playing their best basketball. And so when you're playing basketball like Luca and you're playing basketball like the Joker and Giannis, you think, or they think that they really, like they're the best thing since sliced bread. But they're not. When you look at the history of basketball, if they was to look at the history of the NBA and study the great players before them, they would know that like there's still a lot of growing for them to do. But what the league do is they allow these guys to play the way they playing, um, not be two-way basketball players. Like they can just focus all the way on offense and not play both sides of the, except for Giannis. Giannis play both sides of the basketball, right? But Giannis' game still, when you look at his game, is has not gotten better on the offensive end, right? And so, but if you study basketball, then you have something to shoot for. That's why, you know, that's what Kobe did. Like Kobe studied Elgin Baylor, because he said that he really liked Elgin Baylor's footwork, which I didn't know. You know what I mean? Like I had no idea. I knew he liked Mike and he studied Mike, but he went back and studied guys from like the 70s. He learned from like his father, right? So studying the game it helps you to become a better player. It gives you something to shoot for. If you see somebody like the guy who came before you and you study him, somebody who was a really good basketball player, and you study them, then you're going to take the great things or the good things about his game and add them to your game while you continue to work on your game. But European basketball players are not required to do that. European basketball players, um, you know, probably don't even care to know. And like you can't really blame them. They don't even really care to know about guys like Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, right? They don't, they might know like Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. But again, when you're telling them that they're the best thing since sliced bread, like there's no incentive for these guys to want to get better and pattern their game after somebody. I did hear Lucas said that he watched Michael Jordan and he patterned his game after, he admired Michael Jordan. But if he admired Michael Jordan was a two-way basketball player, right? So why not shoot for that? Michael Jordan played defense and offense, and on offense, Mike was a more unselfish. People think he was selfish, but if you were open, Mike would get you the basketball. Mike was more efficient, which Luka is not very efficient. Like Luka would dribble the ball for, like down to to the last 5 seconds of the clock and give a hot pass to his teammate and expect his teammate to be able to, create and hit a shot in 5 seconds, right? So that's not efficient basketball. That's not that's not the way Mike played. That's not the way Kobe played. That's not the way Larry Bird played. And so if they studied the history of basketball, then they would know, like what Mike or what Bird did in certain situations. And not just think that because the league is telling them, "Oh yeah, you're the best thing since sliced bread." You're working on uh you're performing on a level that nobody, it's just a whole bunch of nonsense that goes into what they tell these foreign basketball players. And like I said, I just think it's disrespectful that those guys are not required to know the history of the game. You see like all the greats in every sport know the history of the game. Like Peyton Manning, is notorious for him, like the way he studied football, listening to you know, watching not only his father who played, but even guys who played before that, like the guy just knew the history of the game. And that's why he turned out to be like one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Um, y- I don't get it. I don't know why nobody is really telling these guys that because you will get a better, you just will get a better performance from these guys. They really just, if you ask me, they're really just playing based on their physical ability. And so when you play on your physical ability only and not get better from a mental standpoint, then the window for you to be a championship is a lot more narrow because you have only a certain amount of years to perform at a physical level. Whereas though if on a mental level, you can carry your game to a you mentally you can just accomplish so much more because you'll be so much wiser about the game. That's why it's important to study the game, but I'm just not seeing these young guys study the game. I'm not seeing the nobody around the league. Like you never hear anybody around the league encouraging these guys to study the game. And it's crazy because like even like American ball players don't really study the game. You could tell they don't study the game like that because and people would say like, well, JJ Redick said that those guys that played back in the day was a bunch of gas station attendants and stuff like that. And that might be the reason why JJ Redick, you know, was always a role player when he played because if you calling Jerry West and all those guys and Bob Cousy, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, like if you think that they were not good basketball players, then you don't understand anything about the game. Those guys who played in the 50s and the 60s is the reason why the 80s, the 70s, and like the 80s, why the 80s was like the golden era because those guys played the game, they advanced the game, and then by the time you get to the 80s, you got Isaiah, Bird, Magic, and Mike, but you had to go through the 50s in order to get to the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. And the guys who play in the 50s is the reason why, like I said, you had 20, 30 years later of guys who had studied the game, guys who knew how to coach the game, guys who knew how to play the game. And then by the time you get to the 80s, man, you're looking at the golden era of basketball. And so these guys will never be able to make the game better because they don't know what they don't know. Because and the reason they don't know what they don't know is because they don't study the game. They're not required to study the game. So, and it's not even their fault. It's not all their fault. But that's my take on it. That's something that I definitely want to speak on it more because as a basketball fan, like if you you get a better product when you have guys out there who are just operating like at a mental level, who just know what they're doing. It's not just all mechanical out there. It's those guys like you get, and that's why basketball, like Kobe Bryant said, there's no strategy to the game, and so you don't have to strategize when you're just doing it from a physical perspective. And you can only do it from a physical perspective when you don't know the history of the game. So that's my take on it. Um, Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment, and I'll check you all out in the next video. Peace.